And instead of learning, he takes his complaints to God and he says something like, well, like, what the hell's going on here? I'm breaking myself in half, making my sacrificial offerings, and everything's being rejected. What kind of stupid cosmos did you produce? And God says to him something very interesting and complicated. He says something like, you're blaming your bitterness on your failure, and you have failed, and you know it, and you didn't have to, but it isn't your failure that's making you bitter. You've invited something in to inhabit you that's turned you against yourself and what's good. He says to him, sin crouches at your door like a sexually aroused predatory animal, and you invited it in to have its way with you. And there's a sexual metaphor there. Oh yeah.
That's heavy.
It's rough, man. It's rough. You don't get to be a high school shooter till you've had 1,000 hours of brooding over your misery. And so that's what God tells Cain. And that makes him violently angry and murderous. And so he kills Abel. He kills his own ideal. And Abel, you have Cain, who makes poor sacrifices and whines about it. He's the perennial victim, shaking his fist at God and the world, refusing to learn from his experiences. And you have Abel, who makes the right sacrifices and aims upward. That's the pattern. Two spirits. That's the Joker and Batman. That's Lex Luthor and Superman. That's Voldemort and Harry Potter. It's Satan and Christ. Like it's this eternal recurrent pattern. And one of its manifestations is Marxism, and another one of its manifestations is postmodernism. And so this is a very old story. It's a very old story. And you can understand Cain's point, because people do break themselves in half in life trying to struggle forward, and they're not successes in their own eyes, and they're rejected by other people, and it undermines their faith in being itself. You can understand that. But you're called upon to bring your best to the table no matter what happens to you, and to maintain your faith and your courage, and to aim up. There's no excuses. Your past trauma, there's no excuses. Doesn't matter what it is. And so there's this battle. And what's happened in the universities is the universities have been captured by the resentful spirit of Cain. And so that's all flowered up with postmodern language. There's no ultimate unity. That's the claim of the postmodernists. There's no overarching narrative. It's like, that's what the postmodernists claim, skepticism with regards to meta-narratives. It's like, well, what do you mean by that? You mean that everything culminates in disunity? That's your theory of being? So how the hell do we come together as a society then? And around what? Well, everyone goes their own way. Yeah, that's called war. So is there a higher unity in which everything participates or not? Well, the postmodernists is like, no. Have it your way. Nihilism, disunity, anxiety, hopelessness, social disintegration, conflict. That's that pathway. And that's just where it starts. That's the optimistic view. So we're trying to present at Peterson Academy and in the other enterprises that I'm engaged in, we're trying to present a unified underlying vision and a traditional unifying underlying vision. And I think that it's understandable, what we talked about in the first part of this interview. Like, once you understand that sacrifice is the basis of community, and once you understand that there's a ultimate form of sacrifice, and that's what's demanded of you if you're going to strive upward, then the contours of the religious story that undergirds the West fall into place. And that's a very remarkable thing to observe, and I think that's going to happen. I think we're at the end of the Enlightenment, and something new is striving mightily to emerge.
Well, it's also interesting that these higher education institutes, even though they do have, the way you're describing, they're extremely wealthy. They're extremely valuable. The name brand to them is still extremely potent. They have so many things going against them in terms of like an objective analysis of what's good for your education and what's good for preparing for your future. And then on top of that, they're burdened with this insane financial problem the insane problem of, first of all, student loans being something you never get out of.
Indentured servitude.
Yeah. And the fact that we all know that the human frontal lobe, especially on males, doesn't even fully develop until you're 25. So you're kind of taking advantage of a developing mind and locking them into an insane burden of debt.
And ideology.
And so you're strapped with debt, so you must work, and then you must work within these structures that have been infected by this ideology, because everyone's coming out of the universities into those places, into those businesses and corporations, and they're deeper and deeper interwoven into the structure of these businesses to the point where they're inescapable. And then you can't leave because you have financial burdens. And you have all the student loan debt to pay off.
Right.
Something is an alternative to that if it can become effective to the term, like if people can get employment. You know, it's interesting, like...
Well, as soon as we determine the accreditation route, like I said, I'm in active communication with a number of people who are interested in accreditation. But I have to figure out if that's the right route. If it isn't, I'm going to work directly with interested employers to make sure that what our students obtain as a consequence of going through the Peterson Academy process is recognized by them as a marker of a high-quality applicant.
Yes.
And I know that problem is solvable because I know how to do that.
Well, there's a lot of employers now that are kind of discounting the ideas of degrees. Now, Elon is a big one of them.
Yeah.